Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May's two closest advisers, Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill, have resigned following the Conservative Party's failure to win a majority in Parliament in the general election. The BBC understands the Prime Minister had been warned she faced a leadership challenge if she didn't sack them. The government's chief whip, Gavin Williamson, is now in Belfast to hold talks with Northern Ireland's largest party, the DUP, to secure support for Mrs May's minority government. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
They were at the heart of power, the Prime Minister's closest advisers for years. But Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill were accused of having too much control over policy and tactics, costing Theresa May her majority, costing them their jobs.
They're brilliant street fighters and terrible political leaders, because actually what you need at the heart of government is a few grey-haired people that have been around the block a bit and say, don't do that, you're going to make mistakes.
Mistakes acknowledged by Nick Timothy today. He said Britain was divided. The Prime Minister is the one political leader who understands the division, who has been working to address it. But, he said, the Conservative election campaign failed to get this and her plan for the future across. And today, as the consequences of the campaign sunk in, reflection and recrimination. Some Tory MPs saying Theresa May had to heed calls to change.
There were plenty of voices in the Conservative Party that reminded her that you can't run the government like you run the Home Office. And there have been plenty of calls to make sure that the circle around her was wider and more inclusive, to prevent anyone believing that the two principal advisers had undue influence.
The Prime Minister's under pressure from all sides. With no majority, her plans for things like grammar schools and social care will be hard to get through Parliament. And the Queen's speech, her programme for government, is just over a week away.
I cannot see how a Queen's speech can be laden with interesting pieces of legislation, because many of them are going to be items which will cause dispute within the Conservative Party and certainly between the Conservative Party and the DUP.
Theresa May is seeking support from Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party in order to govern here. There are formal talks underway today. But in order to lead a minority government, she'll have to balance competing demands on almost every front, considering not just the position of the DUP on some issues, but that of her own MPs too. In Scotland, there are now 13 of them. Their backing essential to the Prime Minister. The party leader here already suggesting a revised approach to Brexit.
I think what's really clear is that the Conservative Party, having failed to win a majority, now needs to work with others. And that means that we can look again at what it is we hope to achieve as we leave the European Union, and I want to be involved in those discussions.
The Prime Minister may be back in number 10, but in a position far from what she'd hoped. She's lost her two most trusted aides. She's lost her majority in the House of Commons. And the job of leading has become that much harder.
Yeah, Alex, just flesh out then where you think the two departures of her advisers actually leave Theresa May.
Well, Theresa May operated on the basis of a very small inner circle of trust, and Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill were right at the centre of that. So their departure will undoubtedly leave her feeling isolated. But more than that, I think it shows the level of influence that Tory MPs can and now will influence over the Prime Minister, because there were suggestions that if these two aides didn't depart, then she might face a leadership contest. Now, with their departure, she's bought herself some time on that front, some breathing space. There is no immediate clamour for her to go. Most Tory MPs are saying the country does now, after so much instability, need a period of instability, and Theresa May is the Prime Minister. But there are questions now about how effective she can be in government, because we know the Conservative Party is very deeply divided on many issues, not just domestic policy, but of course Brexit, where there are differing opinions about the direction the government should take. And Theresa May is on the verge of starting those complex negotiations. So this election, the fact she lost her majority and now the fact she's lost these advisers, has undoubtedly left Theresa May weakened.
OK, Alex, many thanks. Alex Forsyth there at number 10 Downing Street.
So the falling out over the post-election fallout continues, with both of Theresa May's top advisers, Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill, having to quit. The announcement came after a former Downing Street Director of Communications went public with claims of bullying and dysfunction inside Number 10, and just as the PM was trying to piece together a new cabinet. As Paul McNamara now reports, it all adds to the fractious atmosphere around Westminster.
They've fallen on their swords, possibly before knives were plunged into their backs. They were Theresa May's most trusted and senior advisers. Today, Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy have resigned from Downing Street. Fiercely disliked by many MPs, it's understood the Prime Minister was told if Timothy and Hill didn't go, she would face a leadership challenge. Their shadow on Downing Street was felt by many. One who has worked with them in Number 10 told us Hill was capable of reducing senior civil servants to gibbering wrecks, and that Timothy was brooding and quiet, but ruthless. Many blame the pair for Theresa May's fall from grace in the polls, including Katie Perrier on the right, Theresa May's former communications director, who wrote in the Times today,
I genuinely believe Theresa May when she stood on the steps of Number 10 in July last year and said we would run a country for everyone and stand to fight injustice. I hung that speech on the wall of my Downing Street office and felt that, together, we were the crusaders against the stigma of mental ill health, the saviours of the union and the champions of the working class. But there was no together. Her closest advisers put pay to that.
Behaviour it seemed Conservatives were willing to put up with, as long as they were winning. The news of Mr Timothy's resignation emerged in an article he wrote for the Conservative Home website.
I take responsibility for my part in this election campaign, which was the oversight of our policy programme. In particular, I regret the decision not to include in the manifesto a ceiling as well as a floor in our proposal to help meet the increasing cost of social care.
There a reference to the so-called dementia tax, which many have accused Timothy of being behind. He added,
I want to place on record my sorrow for the Conservative members of Parliament who lost their seats, several of whom are close friends.
Ms Hill also gave a short statement to Conservative Home.
It's been a pleasure to serve in government and a pleasure to work with such an excellent Prime Minister. I have no doubt at all that Theresa May will continue to serve and work hard as Prime Minister and do it brilliantly.
Downing Street looks very lonely today. Not only is the Prime Minister dealing with a humiliating election, she's doing so without her two most trusted advisers. The question is, will the heads of Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill be enough to placate Theresa May's most aggrieved MPs? Or will they want her blood too? 6 months from now, do you think she'll still be the Prime Minister?
I don't know. It's much too early to say. But her chances of hanging on now, you have to say, with her authority shot like this, are not great. You know, I think she has to sort of find it in her way of working, in her whole way of managing the Conservative Party and the government, to kind of run it in a much more collegiate and power-sharing way than she has before. And I think that's going to be a kind of steep mountain to climb.
There's still that business of trying to form a government, hopefully with the help of the DUP's 10 MPs. The Tory Chief Whip is meeting them in Northern Ireland today to discuss an agreement. With Nick Timothy out as Chief of Staff, rumours are already swirling about who will replace him, as well as who will be appointed to key cabinet posts. But whoever is appointed, the question is, can a minority government that has to negotiate Brexit really limp on for a full 5 years?
Paul McNamara reporting there, and I'm now joined by Joey Jones. He worked as Theresa May's spokesperson when she was Home Secretary. Joey Jones, the picture painted of the environment presided over by these two special advisers is pretty ugly, isn't it?
Yes, it's not a picture, obviously, that I was a part of within Downing Street. And actually, even when I was at the Home Office then, both Nick and Fiona were, to some extent, out of the picture. They were no longer working at the Home Office, though they cast a very, very long shadow within that organisation and had put in place structures, if you like, that everybody else pretty much knew that they were expected to follow beyond their tenure there. But I have known them both for a very long time, obviously, particularly as a journalist. But then when I worked with Fiona when she was at Sky News, when we were both journalists then. So I know them both well. I know they're both, can be pretty volatile and can be pretty punchy,
toxic,
aggressive.
Some of the words being used about the way the department felt?
There's no secret, though, at Westminster that both of them can be very aggressive, okay? Everybody knows that. Everybody has their own story of a bit of a run-in. I'm probably one of the few that don't really. But everybody else knows that things have got pretty het up and difficult at times. I would say that, look, let's see what comes out. I'm sure there will be a bloodbath in the Sunday papers tomorrow. If really this amounted to bullying, and I think that it seems as though people are going to suggest that it will do, I think it's not just the Prime Minister, Cabinet Secretary, lots of other people need to take a long, hard look at themselves as to why that was allowed to continue.
But the wider problem is the picture it paints of Theresa May herself, a grown woman, the Prime Minister no less, who, it seems, was unable to stand up to or make a decision without these two advisors, unelected advisors, of course.
The only person that it doesn't matter in terms of the government of the country, who's the Chief of Staff, Joint Chief of Staff, as long as you have a functioning operation in Downing Street. This is damaging above all to the Prime Minister. You're quite right to say that, and the past few days have been cataclysmic from her point of view. But I think we need not to kid ourselves as to what has happened here. We will see a lot of talk about a possible, turning over of a new leaf, a more consensual and collegiate version of government with Theresa May at the helm of it. That's not really what this is about. Why have Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill resigned and not Theresa May? Because the Conservative Party has exacted its pound. It wants a pound of flesh. It wants to humble the Prime Minister, and the party wants to show her, you're not boss, we're the party, we are boss, and we will decide what happens next.
But that is an impossible position for her to stay in for long, isn't it? She's in hock to her own party. She's now looking to be in hock to the Democratic Unionists.
It, to me, looks like an invidious situation. It means that she will be friendless within Downing Street in a dynamic that is entirely unaccustomed to her, because the unit of Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill and Theresa May is so close and seamless and indissoluble that it will be incredibly uncomfortable from her point of view. And it looks to me as though she is, for as long as the Conservative Party allows her to be, a hostage to the party within Downing Street, prisoner within that building, which I think will be a very, very uncomfortable place for her, in the knowledge that at somewhere else, within, around here, or maybe in somebody's constituency or whatever, the men in grey suits, men and women, as they like to call it, will be working out what happens next. And at some point, there'll be a rap on that glossy door of number 10, and it'll be...
So she's saved at the moment only by the fact that they simply can't get rid of her right now. It's just not practical.
I think she's saved at the moment because the challenge of what to do next is a big one. It's really difficult. None of the other options look great. Nobody really wants, within the Conservative Party, I would imagine, to have a leadership election that would imply a new leader without a mandate, maybe another general election. None of that looks great, but the current situation doesn't feel sustainable, and it certainly isn't really palatable.
And as you say, we may hear more about Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill tomorrow, but they're not here to defend themselves, so it'll be interesting to see what they've got to say about everything.
Well, they are much more, they are not just the caricatures that they will be painted tomorrow, the technicolor, lurid detail that you will see. I think there is more to them than that. You have to look back at their record at the Home Office as well. Modern slavery bill, emulated all over the world. You or I will never be able to have that sort of achievement.
Jerry Jones, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for joining us today.
I've been getting